I'll call the Special Regional Council meeting to order. Developing meaningful relationships with our Indigenous neighbors is a priority in the Northern Rockies Regional Municipality. As such, we are collaborating with First Nations governments and Indigenous organizations to develop a respectful and regional council meeting to order. Developing competition there. It is. I don't know who that was, but he had a wonderful voice. Developing a respectful and meaningful territorial acknowledgement. This work also presents an opportunity to learn more about the culture and history of Indigenous peoples of our region. Please be advised that this meeting is being recorded and streamed. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Gerwing, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried. Mr. Jack McCuaig from MAE Engineering. Energy audit findings and recommendations update. Mr. McCuaig.
Yes.
It's good to see you.
Thank you. It's good to be back, I guess.
We also have Councillor Andrews joining us. We have Councillor Roper here, Councillor Gerwing, Councillor Souls. So, Mr. McCuaig, if you wanted to start with introductions on your end, it'd be great.
Sure. I'll just jump in. My name is Jack McCuaig. I'm with McCuaig & Associates Engineering, affectionately called MAE Engineering. I am a principal of the company and a professional engineer. I don't know if you can see her on your end, but we have Natalia Sesse also here. And she is also involved in the project. She has a master's in engineering architecture. It's a Spanish thing. It's not quite the same as a Canadian one, but essentially she's well qualified to help us out. The purpose that I'm here for today is to present where we are. We basically reached a few forks in the road in the town hall upgrades. And at this point, we need some feedback from council. So we are presenting some information. There's going to be 4 meetings, and I'll get into that in a little more detail during the presentation, but there will be a few meetings presenting information. And at the end of it, we're going to pretty much ask for decisions about which direction you want to go with each of these. And so today's meeting is the first of 4. Should I just jump right into the presentation?
Sure, go right ahead.
Oh, okay, sure.
I think I've set you up to share, Jack, so you should be able to share your screen.
I should. Screen. Let's go with this. You should be seeing a PowerPoint presentation. Is that correct? Anyone?
Not yet.
Not yet. Oh.
Not yet. Okay.
Ooh, something's happening.
Something's happening.
I think we're good now.
We're good now?
So we don't see your presentation view. We just see your, like we see the preview. Yep, there we go. Now we see presentation.
Oh, I'm on the wrong page. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, here we go. Okay, so as I alluded to, that today's presentation is to essentially bring everyone up to date as where we are. This is the first of 4. This is the energy report, which we affectionately called it. There's more to it than energy, but it's a good title to start with. A brief introduction of who the project team involved is. MAE, as I alluded to, is McCuaig & Associates Engineering. We are the lead consultant. We have specialists in mechanical engineering, building envelopes. We do asset management and all that sort of stuff as well. We have involved a team of sub-consultants to help us out on the project. Structural Solutions is doing the structural. Iredale Architecture is doing all of the architectural aspects, and they will be doing part of the presentations later. Senesco is doing fire services and code issues, and we have AES for the electrical. This timeline slide you have seen before in previous presentations. The bar, we are slowly sliding down the bar. We are here, we basically got some shortlisted options. We're at the point where it's time to get feedback, and the detailed design can start shortly thereafter. I have purposely left dates out of this. Our meetings are scheduled over the next couple of weeks. We're hoping to get answers in early June, and if that's the case, we can start the detailed design then. and we could have a finalized design by the fall. I appreciate that if depending on information feedback and everything else, that may slide a little bit, but that's our intent at this point. So the next 4 different meetings coming up are energy options, stakeholder feedback, conceptual design, and then there's a special meeting just for council feedback. With a little more detail, we have the first one being the energy report. That's what we're doing today. We'll be discussing grant opportunities and energy options, and it should become apparent why this is important. The reason we're doing it first is because, in my opinion, it's a good example of exactly the sort of questions we have to answer before we proceed. The next one is stakeholder feedback, and essentially there are other stakeholders involved. Essentially the tenants, we have the clubhouse, the library, the theater, the play school, and all of which have been contacted over the last several months, and they've been asked essentially for a wish list, and they do have several wishes they would like, and all of those will be presented at the next meeting. Following one, there's going to be conceptual design. We basically have 3 options that we're working through about how the floor plans are going to look and how it will affect things, and of course pros and cons of each of them, and that will be presented by Ardell Architecture, and we expect the council to have questions or concerns about each of those and hopefully make a decision on that. And on June 6th, we have a special meeting, which we can cancel if everybody's perfectly happy and knows everything they want, but we do expect questions to come back after you've had a chance to think about everything. And then the whole team will be there and we can answer questions as needed. Today's agenda is relatively straightforward. It's not that long. We did a substantial energy report. It went on over 150 pages and is very detailed. And part of the reason for the report was there are certain grants that may be available, and the energy report is a requirement of any of those grants. And rather than slog through 150 pages, we then shortened it to about a 4-page report that I believe has been sent out to everybody. And then we will be discussing the results of that. There's also some grant opportunities that are very important, and we want to discuss what your options are. In terms of energy, the thing I will be focusing on almost entirely is HVAC, the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. This is the main energy cost. In fact, it's the only energy cost that's significantly approachable to make any changes at all. All of the rest, sure, we're just assuming we're going to be using LED lights and this sort of stuff, but frankly, trying to save a little bit of money to have a high efficiency photocopier is really not significant. You should do it, of course, but it's not going to make any difference and doesn't really require a decision. Those are usually no-brainers. But there is a large fork in the road when it comes to how you heat your building and how we get to it. And this is why we're here today. The considerations for any heating system, we have to look at the whole thing. Capital cost, of course, is important. That's how much you're paying today. Operational cost is the long-term cost, and that includes reliability. So essentially, operational costs means how long will this thing be there, how much will it cost to keep it operating, maintenance and fuel and everything else. And then, of course, there's related issues because some of the decisions will affect grants. There's that word grant, it keeps coming up. So if you did read our energy report, thank you. We effectively boiled things down to 4 main options, which the first one being if you keep your existing system. I think we've talked about that in the past. It's a bad system. It doesn't work. It's a holdover from when this building was a hotel. So we do not recommend doing that. But you have 3 ongoing options after that. The simplest and most straightforward is rooftop packaged units. Effectively, that means you take a prepackaged heating cooling system, you drop it into the roof and you connect a duct to it and you turn it on and you walk away. Very simple design, very easy, not necessarily the most efficient and not the cheapest. The next one would be going to heat pumps, which save a lot of energy, but they use electricity only. And the third one is a dual source heat pump. And dual source heat pumps use both electricity and natural gas. So it's important to know that any of those 3 options will work. It's the engineer's problem to make them work. The staff, the people actually working there or yourselves, all you do is set the thermostat and walk away. Any of those other options are certainly viable and can work. So the comfort part is not part of it. The main difference is cost, and they do cost very different. So the best cost option is definitely a dual source heat pump system. What that does is it lets us use natural gas for heating during the coldest months of the year. And I'm going to affectionately say that's about 4 months. And during all the shoulder season, when it's not as cold, we can be using a heat pump, which uses electricity. And it switches between them. It's a very clever device and decides when the efficiency is best to use one over the other. And it does consider that the price point is different for each of those fuels. During our original estimates for the project and everything else, we were putting a capital cost of the HVAC at $1.75 million and an annual fuel cost of $128,000 a year. That's based on a standard system, and we can hit that no problem. However, the reason we're here today is I want to change those numbers, and you will see why very shortly. When we're choosing the different systems, system efficiency, energy saving measures, and grants are effectively what we're looking at. So the system efficiency, the dual source heat pump will affect that. That is the most efficient system you can get. Energy saving measures is where things get interesting, and grants are tied to those. All of our assumptions are looking at a 25-year lifespan of the equipment. And so we have assumed these numbers. Now, these numbers come from the Canadian government. They are recommended numbers to use for any future estimations of cost. Carbon escalation rate, there's a carbon tax. It's supposed to be going up about 5% a year. Energy escalation rate is about 2%. Construction escalation rate is about 3%. And operation and maintenance is about 4%. Now, in the short term, clearly those numbers are ridiculous because I think the energy cost has gone up. You guys probably know better than me, but I think it's gone up by about 50% in the last few weeks. But that's a blip. Things over time, if we allow for a reasonable estimate of what the cost increase will be, we're using these numbers. And to be blunt, people who spend way more time at this than I am, who are way cleverer at future predictions, somewhere in Ottawa have figured out what numbers we should use, and those are the numbers we use. So here's where the rubber hits the road. If you can reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30%, you get a grant of approximately $1 million. That's a pretty big ask because 30% is a big number, but we can do that. But we can't do it easily, but we sure want the $1 million. So to reduce greenhouse gas by 30%, we have basically two options. We can reduce the usage entirely through measures within the building, or we can go electric. Because if you go electric in British Columbia is almost greenhouse gas free. It's not 100%, obviously, but it's enough that we would achieve our 30% reduction. It's not necessarily a good choice though. Heating by electricity is 2 to 3 times the cost of gas. So the truth is, if we took the 100% electrical option, you would end up paying more in the long term, even with the $1 million reduction.
So, Mr. McCuaig, let me just stop you there. The electricity in Fort Nelson is generated using natural gas, and we are not on BC's grid. And I don't know if that affects the grants available for the Northern Rockies, because the more electricity you use, the more natural gas, the more greenhouse gases will be produced. Unlike if you were in Prince George, where if you were on electric, the electricity is generated from the WAC Bennett Dam, which is virtually green, no greenhouse gases. So when the government talks about a grant for switching to electricity, are they speaking globally about BC Hydro's energy, or are they speaking specifically about how we generate our electricity?
Well, I'm going to duck the question entirely and say, we're recommending you don't switch to electricity to save greenhouse gas, because we're looking at a 25-year period here, and regardless of how it's done today, things may change. When Site C comes online, who knows what's happening. But regardless of all of that, we're saying don't rely on electricity, because the cost of the electricity makes that system less preferred. So we don't want to do that.
Okay.
So we are going back to the dual source where we're heating mostly with gas. which means we're into the energy saving measures. This is the way we're going to achieve our 30%. And the only way we can hit that number is we literally have to replace windows to increase the R value of the windows, increase the R value of the roof, and insulate the exterior walls. This is an expensive endeavor, $3.3 million. This is something we did not include in our initial budgets. And it could very easily be seen by everybody as, well, wait a minute, that's a huge scope increase. Why are you doing it? And this is why we need feedback, because we don't do it lightly. If you spend $3.3 million to bring energy usage down by 30%, you qualify for $1 million grant, and you reduce fuel consumption by about $65,000 a year. Remember these numbers. If we use these numbers and we apply it over the 25-year period of the life of the equipment, we end up being able to do what they call a present worth analysis or present value analysis. Now, net present value for life cycle cost, I should have said this before I put the slide up, because now you're going to look at the slide. But net present value in very simple terms is how much money do you have to have in the bank in an interest-bearing account today, so that at the end of the life of the equipment at 25 years, you'll have zero left. So it will pay the capital cost up front. It'll pay all the operating costs. It will generate some revenue in the bank because there's a return on investment of a few percent. But at the end of the day, you'll end up with zero money. So here's your two options. You put in the $1.75 million simple system. It can be the dual source heat pump, because the cost is still in the range of that, but we don't change the walls, the roof, or the windows, because you don't want to spend the extra money now. And I get that, cash flow is king. Your annual fuel cost is in the range of $120,000. And at the end of 25 years, today's dollar equivalent of that whole thing is $6.8 million you would have spent. That's everything: fuel, capital cost, maintenance, repairs, the whole shooting match. If you spend more money now, so $5.06 million, but you get $1 million back, so you're actually spending $4 million, then your fuel cost goes down, and you do get the $1 million grant because your fuel cost goes down. And over the life of the equipment, over 25 years, the actual cost works out to $4.9 million. So here's where the rubber meets the road. Spend an extra $2.25 million now, you save almost $2 million over the next 25 years. Now, some people would say, well, of course, that's a no-brainer, but of course it's not, because this is money. Everybody, cash is king. You may not have the ability to spend an extra $2.25 million today. From an engineering standpoint, it's a good idea. It's recommended. It's a good plan. It saves you money in the long term. It's very reliable and all these sort of things. There are some details of that, and I will defer to the staff to help you on that, because saving fuel, and I think I have this understood properly, fuel costs fall under a different category from capital cost in terms of your budgeting and what qualifies for grants and everything else. So spending more money on capital may be preferred, so you spend less money on annual fuel costs. That's something for you guys to deal with. From an engineering standpoint, money is money, but you can save almost $2 million if you spend more now, but the net effect is saving over the long term. So this slide is everything I want you to know about. This is the most important aspect. If this needs a decision. And you may not have the $2.25 in your wallet, and that's okay. We'll go back to our original estimates and the original assumptions and do it. It'll work. The project can proceed.
Just one moment, Mr. McCuaig. I have a question from Councillor Gurley.
Okay.
So that's just looking at this one grant opportunity, right? There could be other grant opportunities to do some of this capital that haven't been considered in this proposal yet. Is that true?
I advanced this slide at exactly the right time. HVAC and envelope costs are independent of other aspects of this project. There are other grants available, and the other grants are not tied to greenhouse gas reduction. And so the other grants affect the project, absolutely, and they affect the budgets, absolutely. But this decision today, you have an opportunity for $1 million grant if you make other changes The other changes are not tied to a grant. If any other grants you get, you can spend in different ways, but this is a binary decision. You can't get the grant unless you make these repairs. And if you do make these repairs, you save money. So the other grants aren't part of it. But yes, there are other grants available, and we are working through those with Luann, sort of even as we speak. So,
Councillor Andrews.
I'm just curious about the grant itself. Like, is it a guaranteed grant if we do it all? Because the way it's being presented here, it's like no matter what, we're going to get this grant.
Well, the grant is, well, okay. So failing a change of the federal government, I would be shocked if they eliminated the grant in the next couple of months, but you are correct. The grant is available now. The grant is well described. We can achieve the 30% greenhouse gas reduction. So the requirements are there. They would be met. So I don't expect the grant to be canceled, but you are right. I can't promise you that it won't be.
Oh, sorry. Luann, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. I just thought I'd give you some general information specific to the grants on a bigger picture. Generally speaking, to find anything that will support a town hall or a public works building, they're pretty rare. So that's why we did the energy audit, because without that 30% greenhouse gas emissions, we just don't qualify for any grants that are out there. And this gives us an edge in that. The FCM grant that we're specifically talking about, we have to make application, of course, be approved for it. So there's no guarantee we're going to get it. And the other grant that we specifically identified currently is the strategic funds priority. It's 100% funding and specifically excludes town halls. However, does provide for community buildings, including town halls, if there's an energy enhancement. So there is potential for 2 grants, no guarantees that we'll get either. And those are the only ones that we've found to this point. So I don't know if that clarifies anything.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Jack, do you mind reminding council what portions of the work you've described would have been were included in the base scope of work?
So in the base scope of work, the main thrust is we have to, well, we'll get into it in much more detail with the next one. But option 1 that we've affectionately called option 1 from our design team is to basically fix any code issues that the building has, code and safety, but they're fairly closely tied together. We're also upgrading the building to allow for barrier-free access to all areas of the town hall, and which then requires us to put it in an elevator and all that sort of stuff. And we're upgrading, as part of the code aspects, we're upgrading fire stops and alarms and electrical and everything else. The base proposal, option 1, really doesn't go past those, not in any significant measures beyond. As I said, we're also, of course, from the HVAC. We have an option 2, which says while we're doing option 1, there are things that you have one chance to fix now in the next 25 years, and we should fix it. And in very simple terms, it's basically making the building more workable for what it's supposed to do, because there's several areas where things were just kind of used or done because that's what was there. And we're addressing those, because once we've opened up all of the walls to fix the electrical and the mechanical and everything else, why would we put them back where we don't really want them? So there's a second level there. And the third option that you'll get way more information on. So please don't ask me questions about each of these options, because we will have way more detail later. But the third option essentially says, if we're considering all of the potential upgrades of the tenants in the space, so the theater and or theater, the clubhouse, the library, and the play school. If we consider what has been asked to fix those, there's also the services building. I left that one out. If some of those places have asked for upgrades, Some of their upgrades are included in our project because, of course, if we're doing the electrical, that's included. If we're doing some life safety upgrades, that's included. But some of them are not. And if those are entertained by council, that will affect how the town hall is done because you're shifting everything around to make it all fit. So that's the base scope of what we're looking at. And the reason I want to be really clear about this, there's no doubt in my mind that somebody, whether they're on council or someone watching on YouTube, will say, wait a minute, you just increased our scope substantially. We weren't talking about an envelope upgrade, and we weren't talking about window upgrades because that wasn't part of your scope, and that's true. However, in my mind, now is your time to do it because you get $1 million to do it, potentially. There's a very good chance. And if you don't do it now, you can't do it. Now, you will have to address some of these issues over the next probably 10 years. Certainly the roof will last about 7, I think we said. And the building envelope is pretty robust, but there will be issues to repair it over the next few years. Some of the windows are still single pane, and I don't know how long people will still be willing to sit by single pane windows. But you do not have to do that work as part of this project. If the answer is no, we can proceed. That's not a problem. However, this is your opportunity. And if you take the opportunity, it can be defended by very reasonable engineering analysis and everything else. But again, it comes down to, if you have cash, you should do it. If you don't have the cash, that's fine. We can proceed without it. I think that explained it all. So, and just to piggyback on Luann's comment, yes, it's true, we don't have 100% guarantee of the grant. We qualify for the grant. It's been my experience, once you qualify the grant, you can tick all the boxes, yes, then eventually it happens. However, what we can also do, which is not really very difficult, we can include the design of it, which has a cost, but not a huge cost, and then not actually sign the contract to do the work with the contractor until we get 100% yes on the grant. But if you're not willing to consider it, why waste the time on the design? If you do want to do it, we can do the design. We can set up the contracts and do the tenders so that this work can be done, and then decide. So we don't actually have to decide to do the work until probably as late as January 2023 is probably our last turn back, yes, no. But we have to spend some money up front and make decisions up front before we can have that change. I think Luann has just raised her hand.
Jack, can you touch on the building envelope aspect too, with regards to the heating units and everything too that we spoke about?
Yes. So the heating right now, your heating units for majority of the building are these through wall heating cooling units that essentially stick in the wall. They're part of what was installed when the building was a hotel. So each room had its own heating cooling unit and can be adjusted separately. Right now, there's several along the wall. They all work against each other because if one person wants it cold and the other person wants it warm, one unit is cooling while the other unit is heating, and the energy just gets spent that way. They aren't very efficient. They actually don't transmit air very well. They just don't work well. So those have to be taken out, which means you will have a bunch of holes in the side of your building, which we have to patch. We have allowed for that in the general repair scheme. So regardless of what happens with everything else, those will be removed. So even if you say you don't want to go ahead with the, I dare I say, the more expensive option up front, which is cheaper long-term, even if you don't do that, we will be removing those items and we will be patching the outside. It will be a noticeable patch if you look closely. We will try to make it as match as well as we can. There will certainly be paint matches, and the problem matching the actual siding is a little more difficult. So it will look a little patchy as you go, but it is certainly an option. The other aspects, we will try to keep different areas heated and cooled separately. For example, the room that most of you are in right now is a completely different room from the rest of the building because very rarely, but sometimes it's packed with a whole bunch of people, and the majority of the time it's empty. So it really runs its own separate little system. Today's systems are quite smart. They can deal with all these things and each different area. Ideally, each different area will be much better, so everyone will be happy. I think that covers all of it, and I think it was Sean that asked the question, so feel free to say whether I missed something you were asking about.
No, that was it.
Ms. Watson, you had a question, comment, something?
I just wanted to mention back when Jack was talking about the grants, so we veered a little bit off, but that this Strategic Priorities Fund grant has a deadline of June 30th. So I just wanted to throw that out there for consideration.
Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Councillor Roper.
Let's say we go with the bells and whistles option. Would that mean a significant increase in the local contractor work that we could do? Like, let's say we did the windows. Would that translate to local work?
Well, the windows certainly would not be manufactured locally. I can promise you that. They would probably be manufactured in Alberta, which is the most likely manufacturer, although that's neither here nor there. The intent, and we haven't got there yet, that's my best answer. The intent is to take as much of this work as possible and get locals to do it. And how we shoehorn that into the tender hasn't really been decided. Out of the envelope work, certainly there's a whole bunch of that work that can be done locally. How much of it must be done locally? I would say parts of it probably definitely can't be done locally, because there's some high-tech stuff about how you tie in the envelope for energy savings and everything else, and you need some expertise there. But what could happen quite easily is the general contractor would not be local, but he would be using local subs and effectively teach them how to do it. And my honest answer there is I haven't really explored that enough. I've talked to Luann and to a lesser extent Sean about that, and I know it's an intent, but until we have a finalized scope, we're not sure how much we can demand must be done locally and how we do it through a public tender. So actually I'm in the dark here.
Mr. Barry.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll just add to that. So like any larger project, we do have limitations based on requirements for procurement and whatnot within either our own procurement policy and of course following the Northwest Partnership Trade Agreement. So as we typically do in terms of a project, we look at any opportunity possible to have that local content within our means, of course, right? And in a lot of cases, some of these contractors will come in and look at local subs. But being that depending on how the tender is framed, what the size and the value of that particular procurement would depend on what we can or can't do specific to locals. But we always, through the process, look at every opportunity that we can legally, of course, to involve the locals for sure.
Councillor Penny.
So the work that we're doing to this building could qualify for the IDC agreement?
Yeah, so it's always been on the IDCA list. So we've been collecting funds for years into that reserve fund for buildings and facilities, which has been linked to the IDCA agreement for sure, yes.
Can we still use it? It would still qualify and be able to get this other grant?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
We've done that.
Councillor Andrews.
Well, I was looking at the project and I had some other people reach out to me with concerns to the use of heat pumps in our area, where they have been used and implemented in places like Fort St. John and around here, and they find that they don't work very well and end up putting HVAC in because the heat pumps don't work for our very cold ambient temperatures that we have for the majority of the year. Have they been upgraded, or is there like maybe proof?
Mr. O'Shaughnessy.
Well, to that fact, Councillor Andrews, I reached out to Whitehorse as well because I've heard the similar thing, and I spoke to a couple of contractors in Whitehorse. They have been using these heat pumps, for the last approximately 10 years. And they say that they haven't had any relative issues, but of course, Mr. McCuaig his company is the expert on that, but that's just from my personal reaching out to contractors in the north.
Oh, that's good to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. McCuaig, any comment?
So I think it's important to make the distinction between, and heat pump is a general word, and it encompasses many different devices, even your refrigerator. So what we're talking about is a dual source heat pump that frankly is smart as a device. And what it does is the efficiency of the heat pump goes down as the external temperature goes down. So even probably 5 years ago, the heat pump wouldn't work below about -3 degrees. These days, you actually gain energy down to almost -20 degrees. But what the device now does is it checks the outdoor temperature, determines, and it knows how much heat you need indoors because it's getting calls by the thermostats. And essentially it decides, okay, given today's conditions, I'm going to run only fuel and I'm just running the natural gas, which means your heat pump is doing almost nothing. So on the coldest day of the year, and I think I alluded to 4 months or so, 4 months or so is my very rough estimate, almost all of your heating will be coming from natural gas. For the remainder of the year, the heat pump will come off and on as needed. And on that part, it will be much more clever and you're going to save all your energy. And the truth of the matter is the majority of all of the energy savings you get are usually what we call the shoulder season, because when it's really cold out and we've designed the system properly, it's running close to 100% of the time. So that's just the way it is. It's when it's a somewhat warmer day in the spring and the sun is out, well, guess what? You need no heat, and then you need heat overnight and back and forth. That's where all this thing comes into. And a lot of technology advanced in the last 10 years. And as Sean has alluded to, these devices have been used in the north. We've been involved with them in the Yukon and northern British Columbia, and they've worked quite well, even in very cold climates. So it's important that we say it's a dual source heat pump. And one of the concerns that Sean had, which is a very good one, is the capability of local trades to service these. And there's two answers to that. These have been around for several years and they should be serviceable. And if the local trades right now are not capable of servicing it, this is their opportunity for them to learn something new, because there's no going away from it. As we move forward, this is what you'll see in everybody's house in the next 5 to 10 years. So, because it just makes sense. It's a way better system. So, short answer is the parts are available, they're reliable, they've been used for years elsewhere, and they work.
Councillor Penny.
Kind of answers my question, but what you just said, but with this quote, does it take into effect any critical spares that we would stock here? I mean, even though these parts are readily available in Edmonton or Vancouver, all too often we find ourselves up here literally in the cold waiting on parts. So I just wonder if that's been thought of or not.
The cost of we usually include spares, and the cost of the spares would basically be absorbed in what I effectively call the slop. The numbers we're throwing around are, plus or minus 10, maybe 20%, and the cost of the spares would be in the range of 5%. So they're included. I can't tell you exactly what they are, but it's not we would generally recommend keeping spare parts for the critical parts or the parts that are most likely to fail. So
perfect. Yeah, I like the idea of the minus 20%, but not the plus 20%.
Well, I mean, I have to, I have full disclosure here. In the last year, with supply chain issues and everything else, the cost of everything has been very random, and it's very difficult to estimate. But we do our best, and we say what it is, and this is based on good science and experience and everything else. But yes, it's very difficult to nail it down at this point. When we have a full design and we finished it, we get pricing, you'll have 100%.
Any other questions for Mr. McCuaig? That's it. Okay, no other questions for you, Mr. McCuaig.
Okay, thank you. And I just want to remind everybody that you will have a few more meetings. And one thing that I know that everybody's thinking is, well, before I decide whether we can afford the money, I have to know how much everything else is going to cost. You will have all those numbers at the end. We have to look at the whole project before you get all of the details of each different aspect. So,
thank you. I can't see Ms. Watson's. Does she have any comments? No? We're good.
We're good.
Don't want to miss anybody. Okay, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Okay, I'll just head out then. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
If there's nothing further, then I'll ask for a motion to declare the meeting adjourned. Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? And we are adjourned. Thank you.